Welcome to the channel, my alien friends. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Enjoy listening. The ocean's horizon shimmered under the midday sun, calm and unbroken. On the shores of a quiet beach, Nate stood in the sand, his mind clear from a morning jog along the coastline. He didn't have a care in the world until he saw something that stopped him dead in his tracks. Just beyond the breaking waves, 5 figures emerged from the water. He blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, but as they drew closer, the truth became impossible to ignore. These weren't ordinary beachgoers. Their movements were too fluid, their presence too commanding, and as the women stepped onto the sand, water gleaming off their impossibly flawless skin, Nate's heart pounded with a mix of awe and confusion. At the head of the group was a tall, statuesque blonde, her piercing eyes locking onto Nate's with predatory intent. She walked with the kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance, her long legs effortlessly carrying her across the sand as if she owned the entire shore. Behind her, the others followed. A redhead with striking emerald eyes, a brunette with an athletic build, and 2 women with identical, shimmering purple hair. Nate's breath caught. They looked like supermodels, but there was something wrong, something otherworldly. His instincts screamed that these women weren't here for a leisurely day at the beach. Hi? Nate managed to say, his voice cracking slightly as the blonde stopped only a few feet from him. Are you guys here for some kind of photo shoot or something? The blonde tilted her head, examining him with an unnerving intensity. Her lips curled into a smile that sent a chill down his spine. No, she said, her voice melodic but with an unfamiliar, almost mechanical accent. We are here to conquer your primitive world and enslave humanity. Nate blinked, then burst out laughing, the absurdity of her words catching him off guard. Okay, good one. That's a solid line. Really, you had me going for a second. The blonde didn't laugh. Her icy gaze remained fixed on him, and slowly, the smile vanished from her lips. You mock us? She said, her voice lowering to something far more dangerous. A ripple of energy crackled at her fingertips, bright and electric. Perhaps a demonstration of our power is in order. Nate's smile dropped, replaced by a growing sense of panic. Wait, okay, no need for that. Let's just take it down a notch. My name's Nate, and you are? The blonde lowered her hand slightly, though the dangerous glint in her eyes remained. I am Commander Annis of the Xylarian Conquerors. These are my lieutenants, Lyra, Zara, Nixus, and Val. We are here to assess your planet's defenses, enslave your people, and claim this world as our own. Nate stared, his mind scrambling for an explanation that made sense. Right. You're serious, aren't you? Deadly serious, Anish replied, her tone cold and final. The reality of the situation began to sink in. These women, these impossibly perfect, strange women, weren't joking. Nate wasn't sure if he should run, scream, or start praying to whatever deity might hear him. But instead, against his better judgment, he smiled and shrugged, trying to buy himself some time. Well, it's a hot day out. How about we start with a drink and talk about this whole conquering thing, he offered, motioning to his house further up the beach. I've got cold beer, AC, and a great view. You might as well relax before you, enslave the planet. Anais exchanged a look with her lieutenants. For a moment, there was only the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. Finally, Anais nodded. Very well, Nate of Earth, lead the way. As Nate guided the 5 women back to his house, his heart raced with a mix of fear and adrenaline. He was walking with aliens. Conquerors, they called themselves. Beautiful, dangerous alien conquerors. And now they were following him into his house. Whatever was happening, one thing was clear. His life was about to get a whole lot more complicated. Inside, he did his best to play the casual host, offering drinks and trying not to stare too much at their otherworldly beauty. Anais remained aloof, watching him closely, her icy demeanor never faltering. The other women, while more relaxed, seemed to be constantly on alert, their sharp gazes taking in every detail of their surroundings. So, Nate began, breaking the silence. Why Earth? I'm sure there are plenty of other planets out there. What makes ours worth all the trouble? Lyra, the redhead, spoke first, her voice clipped and formal. Your planet is rich in resources that are rare in our galaxy. Your species, while primitive, is adaptable and could serve our needs. Subjugating Earth will strengthen the Xylarian Empire. Right, Nate said slowly, nodding. And what happens to us? To the people of Earth? Anais stepped forward, her eyes narrowing slightly. You will become slaves, useful only in your service to the Xylarian conquest. Those who resist will be eliminated. Nate swallowed hard. He was in way over his head, but something about Anais intrigued him. There was a hint of vulnerability beneath her commanding exterior, a flicker of uncertainty that she quickly hid whenever it surfaced. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to turn this situation around. Well, Nate said, forcing a grin, I can't say I'm thrilled about the whole enslavement thing, but maybe I could convince you to reconsider. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff about Earth. Maybe if you spent a little more time here, you'd see that conquering us isn't necessary. Anais arched an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. You think you can sway me, human? I have crushed planets far more advanced than this one. Maybe, Nate replied, his heart pounding in his chest. But have any of those planets ever shown you real Earth hospitality? The other alien women chuckled softly at that, but Anais didn't. She merely regarded Nate with those piercing blue eyes, calculating. Very well, she said at last. You have until the sun sets to prove your planet is worth sparing. After that, we will proceed with our mission. Nate felt a surge of both relief and terror. He had bought himself some time, but now the clock was ticking. If he couldn't convince these beautiful alien conquerors to change their minds by sundown, Earth was doomed. As the day wore on, he began to realize something more terrifying than the threat of invasion. The more time he spent with Anais, the more drawn to her he became. There was something dangerously magnetic about her, something that made him want to know more, even if it meant risking everything. And from the way Anais looked at him when she thought no one was watching, Nate couldn't shake the feeling that she might be thinking the same thing. The invasion had begun, but so had something else. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting the beach house in a warm, golden glow. Inside, Nate found himself in an increasingly surreal situation. 5 alien conquerors were scattered around his living room, their posture deceptively relaxed, though Nate knew better. Every glance they exchanged, every quiet whisper in their strange melodic language hinted at their deadly purpose. Still, he kept up the facade of a gracious host, his mind racing to figure out how to survive this. Commander Anais sat closest to him, her icy blue eyes tracking his every move. There was an elegance about her, like a predator who knew she didn't have to rush the hunt. She was beautiful in a way that seemed beyond human, as if her very presence had been engineered to entice, to ensnare. And it was working. Nate found it increasingly difficult to tear his gaze away from her, even as his nerves buzzed with the knowledge that she could destroy him at any moment. The others, Lyra, Zara, Nixus, and Vale, explored the house with curiosity, handling objects with care but observing them as if studying the artifacts of some primitive species. Lyra, the redhead, was inspecting a bookshelf, her fingertips brushing the spines of books while she murmured something to Zara, the tall, brooding brunette. Nixus and Val were absorbed by the view from the windows, staring out at the ocean, with what almost seemed like longing. I have to admit, Nate began, clearing his throat as he handed Anais a glass of water. I didn't expect to spend my day with a group of alien conquerors. Usually, it's just me and Netflix. Anais took the glass without breaking eye contact, her lips quirking into the barest hint of a smile. And we didn't expect to spend the day in the home of a human, she replied, her voice smooth and controlled. Tell me, Native Earth, what is it you hope to gain from this? Hospitality. Nate shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant, even though his pulse was thudding in his ears. I figure if I can show you all that Earth isn't so bad, maybe you'll change your minds about enslaving us. You know, save yourselves the trouble of an invasion and all that. A soft laugh escaped Anais's lips, a sound both beautiful and unnerving. You are amusing, she said, leaning back against the couch. But your efforts are futile. Our mission has been years in the making. Earth's fate is sealed. Is it, though? Nate countered, sitting beside her, careful to keep a polite distance. You don't strike me as someone who follows orders blindly. I think you see more than just a planet to conquer. Anais raised an eyebrow at his boldness. She turned her gaze out the window, watching the waves crash against the shore. We Xylarians do not waste time with sentiment. Emotions, attachments, they are weaknesses. Our species thrives because we remain focused on our goals. I suggest you do the same. Nate nodded, though he could see a flicker of something in her expression, something she was trying hard to suppress. Curiosity? Conflict? He wasn't sure, but he decided to push his luck. Maybe, he said softly, leaning forward slightly, but that's not what I'm seeing right now. I think there's more to you than just a cold commander leading a mission. Maybe there's something here worth saving. For a moment, Anais didn't respond. Her fingers tightened slightly around the glass, and Nate could see the tension in her jaw as she stared at the ocean. Then, with a graceful movement, she set the glass down on the table and stood, the cool mask slipping back into place. You overestimate your importance, Nate, she said, her voice firm but quieter, as if she was trying to convince herself. This is a strategic mission, nothing more. Right, Because that's why you're still here, Nate said with a smirk. Strategic observation. Her gaze snapped back to him, sharp and commanding. But before she could retort, Zara interrupted from across the room, her voice dripping with sarcasm. He thinks he can sway us with human charm, Commander. Shall I dispatch him now and spare you the distraction? Anais shot Zara a warning look, and the brunette fell silent, though Nate didn't miss the flicker of resentment in her eyes. Zara was the most cold-blooded of the group, a true believer in their mission, and clearly not pleased with the direction things were heading. Leave him, Anais said, her tone brokering no argument. He has until sunset, and we will honor that. Zara scowled but said nothing, retreating to the corner of the room where she resumed her hushed conversation with Lyra. Nate let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Thanks, he muttered. Though, you could have just told them I'm great company. Anais gave him a sidelong glance. You misunderstand, Nate. This is not mercy. This is observation. I wish to understand why you continue to press your case when you know it is futile. Maybe I'm just an optimist, he replied. Or maybe I think there's a part of you that wants to believe I'm right. Anais didn't answer right away. She seemed to be weighing her words carefully. You assume much, human. And yet, Nate said, leaning back with a grin, I'm still alive. Anais's lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time, Nate thought he saw uncertainty in her eyes. She turned sharply and crossed the room toward the window, staring out into the setting sun as if it could provide the answer she sought. You believe that your planet is unique, that your people are different from the countless worlds we've conquered, Anais said quietly. But I see no reason to think that. Humans fight wars over land, resources, and power, just as we do. Nate rose and moved closer to her, though he kept a respectful distance. Maybe, but humans also fight for love, for connection. That's something you can't conquer. Anais glanced at him, her expression unreadable. But something in her gaze lingered a moment too long, something softer than the commanding presence she projected. Nate felt the air between them shift, charged with an energy that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. He should have been afraid. This woman could kill him in an instant if she wanted to. But fear was the last thing on his mind. There was something magnetic about her, a pull he couldn't resist. He stepped closer, his pulse quickening, until he was standing just a few inches away from her. Anais, he said softly, you don't have to be what they made you. Her eyes flashed, a dangerous spark, and for a brief moment, Nate thought she might strike him down for his boldness. But instead, she reached out, her hand hovering near his chest, as if testing whether or not she should touch him. I am Xylarian, she said, her voice a low murmur. I am bred for conquest. I know nothing else. Nate's heart pounded. You can learn. The tension between them snapped like a taut wire, and before either of them could think, Anais closed the distance between them. Her lips met his in a kiss that was fierce, consuming, electric. There was no hesitation, no doubt, just raw intensity, as if the weight of her mission, her conflict, everything she had been holding back was poured into that one moment. Nate responded in kind, pulling her closer, his hands tangling in her hair. Anais's touch was cold at first, precise, but it softened as the kiss deepened, her body relaxing against his. It was as if the icy commander was melting, revealing something vulnerable, something human beneath. When they finally broke apart, breathless and dazed, Anais looked at him with a mixture of confusion and hunger. Her walls were crumbling, and for the first time she seemed lost. This is not logical, she whispered, almost to herself. Since when is desire logical? Nate whispered back, his forehead resting against hers. Sometimes you just have to go with it. For a long moment they stood there, caught in the gravity of their shared desire. But as the light outside dimmed and the weight of the world returned, Anais pulled back, her expression guarded once again. I must go, she said, her voice faltering slightly. We will continue this later. And without another word, she slipped away, leaving Nate standing in the fading sunlight, his heart racing and his mind spinning. Whatever he had started with Anais, it wasn't over, but neither was the mission. Dangerous desires had begun to cloud the line between love and conquest, and Nate wasn't sure which side would win. The night air was heavy, thick with the heat of summer and the weight of unspoken words. Nate lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind swirling with thoughts of Anais. She had left hours ago, retreating back to the guest room she shared with her lieutenants, but the memory of their kiss still burned on his lips. What had he gotten himself into? He rolled over, staring at the empty space beside him. His heart raced with the memory of her touch. Cold at first, like steel, but softening the longer they were together. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. For a brief moment, Anise had let her guard down, and in that moment, he had seen her not as the cold, calculating conqueror, but as something else. Something human, and that terrified him. The house was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of the ocean muffled by the storm of emotions swirling in Nate's mind. His rational side screamed that this was insane. These women weren't human, they were invaders here to enslave his people. But another part of him, the part that couldn't stop thinking about Anise, wasn't ready to let go. He had to believe that there was more to her than just the mission. There had to be. A soft knock at his door broke the silence. Nate sat up, his heart skipping a beat. "Come in," he said quietly, though he already knew who it would be. The door opened slowly, and Anais stepped inside. Her silhouette was bathed in the pale light of the moon filtering through the window, her expression unreadable. She closed the door behind her, the faint click echoing in the stillness. "Anais," Nate began, but she held up a hand, silencing him. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low, almost hesitant. Nate nodded, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "Yeah, I think we do." She crossed the room, stopping a few feet from him, her arms folded across her chest as if she were holding herself together. "Something unexpected has happened," she said, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Something that complicates everything." Nate frowned, his heart rate picking up. "What do you mean?" Anais hesitated for a moment, and then, as if making a decision, she took a deep breath and met his eyes. "I'm pregnant." The words hit Nate like a physical blow, knocking the air out of his lungs. He blinked, sure he had misheard. "What? I'm pregnant?" Anais repeated, her voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of something close to panic. "And I am not the only one." Nate's mind spun, trying to process the information. "Wait, what? How is that even possible? You're not human?" "We didn't think it was possible either," Anais said, her voice tight with frustration. "Our species is advanced. We've conquered countless worlds, and no species has ever been biologically compatible with us. But somehow, with you..." She trailed off, shaking her head as if the very idea defied everything she knew. Nate ran a hand through his hair, trying to wrap his mind around what she was saying. "So, you're saying I got you pregnant? And the others?" Anais nodded. "Lyra, Nixus, Vale, even Zara, all of us." For a moment, Nate could do nothing but stare. 5 alien women, each carrying his child. It was impossible, and yet, the way Anais was looking at him told him it was all too real. "How?" he managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know," Anais admitted, her composure cracking slightly. "Our biology is supposed to be incompatible with humans. This should not have happened." Nate stood up, pacing the room as his mind raced. "But it did," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "And now what? What does this mean for the mission? For us?" Anais looked away, her jaw clenched. "It means everything has changed. My lieutenants are confused, angry. They're questioning my leadership, and Zara, she's plotting something. I can feel it." "Zara," Nate repeated, remembering the cold, dangerous look in the brunette's eyes. "What is she planning?" Anais hesitated, then sighed. "She resents me. She believes my attachment to you has compromised our mission, and she may not be wrong. The others, they're starting to follow her. She's already talked to Lyra and Nixus, and I fear it won't be long before she leads a full rebellion." Nate stared at her, dread pooling in his stomach. "And what about you?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Do you think your attachment to me has compromised the mission?" Anais didn't answer right away. Instead, she crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her burden. "I don't know," she admitted finally, her voice barely a whisper. "For the first time in my life, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I was raised to be a conqueror, to lead my people without question. But now..." She looked up at Nate, and for the first time, he saw something vulnerable in her eyes. "Now I feel things I've never felt before. Things that confuse me. Things that make me question everything." Nate sat down beside her, his hand brushing hers. "Anais," he said softly, "you don't have to do this. You don't have to conquer Earth. You don't have to be what they made you." She turned to him, her eyes searching his. "But what else am I?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't know how to be anything else." "You're more than just a conqueror," Nate said, his voice firm. "I've seen it. You care, even if you don't want to admit it. You care about me. You care about the others." Anais stared at him, her eyes flickering with emotion. "And if I do, what does that change? Zara's already plotting against me. I've lost control of my crew. If I don't act, they'll call in reinforcements. Earth will burn, and you..." Her voice broke and she looked away, swallowing hard. "I don't want to lose you." Nate felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of fear and affection tightening his chest. "Then don't," he whispered, gently tilting her chin so she met his eyes. "You can stop this. You can make your own choices. Anais held his gaze, her expression conflicted. For a long, tense moment she said nothing, and then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Before Nate could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the room. Anais' entire body tensed, and Nate's heart sank. They both knew who it was before the door even opened. Zara stood in the doorway, her face a mask of cold fury. Behind her, Lyra and Nixis loomed, their expressions tense but uncertain. "Commander," Zara said, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's time to make a decision." Anais stood, her shoulders squared, though Nate could see the conflict raging inside her. "And what decision would that be, Lieutenant?" she asked, her voice tight with barely restrained anger. Zara's eyes flicked to Nate, then back to Anais. "You've allowed yourself to become distracted by this? Human," she spat. "And now we're all paying the price. The others are losing faith in you. It's time to end this farce and return to the mission." Anais took a step forward, her voice low and dangerous. "The mission has changed." Zara's lips curled into a sneer. "No, you have changed, and that's why you're no longer fit to lead." With that, she drew a sleek, alien weapon from her belt, aiming it directly at Nate's chest. "Make your choice, Commander," Zara hissed. "Him or us, because if you don't, I will." Nate's heart stopped, his eyes locked on the weapon in Zara's hand. Anais stood frozen, her hands clenching at her sides, her eyes darting between Nate and her lieutenant. Seconds stretched into eternity, the tension in the room thick enough to choke on. The weight of everything, the invasion, the pregnancy, the love she felt but couldn't admit, crushed down on Anais all at once. And then, in a moment of clarity, Anais made her decision. With lightning speed, she grabbed Zara's wrist, twisting the weapon out of her hand and throwing her to the ground. Lyra and Nixis gasped, stepping back in shock as Anais loomed over her rebellious lieutenant. "I am still your commander," Anais growled, her voice filled with cold authority. "And as long as I am, you will follow my orders." Zara glared up at her, hatred burning in her eyes. "This isn't over," she spat. "No," Anais said, her voice hard as stone. "It's not." And with that, she released Zara, turning her back on the fallen lieutenant and walking toward Nate. She took his hand, squeezing it tightly, her eyes never leaving Zara's. "From now on, we fight for something else," Anais declared. "For ourselves, for our future." Nate looked at her, his heart swelling with both fear and hope. The love they shared had changed everything, but it had also unleashed a battle that would either destroy them or set them free. The atmosphere in the house had grown suffocating. Tension hung in the air like a thick fog, settling into every corner, every conversation, and every glance shared between the alien women. Nate could feel it, too, an invisible pressure building beneath the surface, threatening to explode at any moment. Anais had grown quieter since the confrontation with Zara, more withdrawn. Her once unwavering confidence had become brittle, cracked by the weight of emotions she didn't fully understand. The pregnancy had only complicated things, forcing her to face the very real consequences of her connection to Nate, and the fact that her body and the bodies of her lieutenants were changing in ways none of them could control. Zara was the worst of them, her resentment festering like a wound. She kept her distance from Anais, her gaze cold and calculating, but Nate could feel her eyes on him constantly. A predator watching its prey. The look she gave him was no longer one of mere contempt, it was personal. Deeply personal. "I don't trust her," Nate muttered, standing beside Annie at the kitchen window, watching Zara and the others out on the deck. "She's planning something. I can feel it." Anais didn't respond right away, her expression troubled as she watched Zara converse in hushed tones with Lyra and Nixis. The wind off the ocean whipped their hair around their faces, but Zara stood still, her dark eyes fixed on something far beyond the horizon. Whatever she was plotting, it wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about power, control, and revenge. "I know," Anais said quietly, her voice thick with conflict. "Zara has always been ambitious, but now, I fear she's lost faith in me completely." Nate turned to her, frowning. "She's dangerous, Anais. She won't stop until she gets what she wants." Anais sighed, leaning her head against the glass. "And what is it that she wants? Control? The mission completed? Or?" Nate's stomach twisted. He didn't need her to finish that sentence. He knew the answer as well as she did. Zara wanted more than just the mission's success. She wanted Nate gone. He was a threat, the human who had derailed everything, the man who had gotten 5 alien conquerors pregnant and turned their once flawless plan into chaos. "You have to stop her," Nate urged, his voice low but urgent. "Before she does something we can't fix." Anais closed her eyes, her body sagging with the weight of it all. "I've already lost half my crew to her whispers," she admitted. "Lyra and Nixis, they follow her now. Only Vale remains loyal, but for how long?" Nate felt a knot of dread tighten in his chest. What are you going to do? I don't know, Anise whispered, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. I am a leader, a commander. I know how to lead soldiers, how to execute a mission. But this… She gestured to her stomach, where the faint swell of pregnancy was becoming more and more visible. This wasn't part of the plan. I don't know how to lead in this chaos. I don't know how to protect us. Nate stepped closer, his heart aching for her. For all her strength, for all the power she wielded as a conqueror, Anise was unraveling under the pressure of something far more profound than any invasion she had ever led. Emotion. And it terrified her. We'll figure it out, he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. But you can't wait. Zara's going to make her move soon, and when she does, she won't hesitate. Anise nodded, but her eyes were distant, her mind clearly working through the turmoil. She turned back to the window, watching the others again, her lips pressed into a thin line. Outside, Zara laughed at something Lyra said, though the sound was sharp and hollow, as if it had no real joy behind it. Nate's skin crawled at the sight of her. There was something too deliberate in her movements, too precise in the way she controlled the conversation. She was rallying the others, pulling them deeper into her orbit, and the more they drifted from Anise, the more dangerous this game became. Anise, Nate said softly, his voice full of warning. It's starting. She's already… I know, Anise cut him off, her voice low and cold. I can feel it. Before Nate could say anything more, Anise turned and walked out of the room, her posture stiff, her face set in grim determination. He watched her go, his stomach a knot of fear and helplessness. She was going to confront Zara. Alone. Out on the deck, the wind picked up, a storm building on the horizon. The tension between the women was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Anise strode toward Zara, her expression hardening with each step. For a moment, Nate thought there might be a chance to defuse the situation, but as soon as Zara's eyes met Anise, he knew it was already too late. The rebellion had begun. The storm hit hard that night. Rain lashed against the windows of the beach house, driven by fierce winds that howled like the fury building inside. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growing closer with each passing moment, mirroring the tension that had come to a head inside the walls. Nate stood by the fireplace, staring into the flickering flames, his mind racing. The uneasy peace that had kept everything balanced for days was unraveling, faster than he had ever imagined. Anise had retreated to her room after her confrontation with Zara on the deck. She hadn't spoken a word since, and it scared Nate. The cool, collected commander he had grown to care for was cracking under the weight of too many decisions, too many emotions she was never meant to feel. And the worst part? Nate was starting to wonder if any of it mattered. The knock at his door startled him, though he had been expecting it. Slowly he turned, his stomach twisting with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Zara stood in the doorway, framed by the storm. Her eyes were dark, gleaming with a dangerous intensity that sent a shiver down Nate's spine. She looked every bit the warrior she was bred to be. Tall, powerful, and completely devoid of the humanity he had seen glimpses of in Anais. There was no warmth in her gaze, only the cold certainty of someone who knew what she wanted. And what she wanted was him. "We need to talk," Zara said, her voice a sharp contrast to the raging storm outside. She stepped into the room, not waiting for an invitation, her presence filling the space like a shadow. Nate tensed, his hands instinctively curling into fists. "If you're here to threaten me again, save it. I've had enough of your power plays." Zara smiled, though the gesture didn't reach her eyes. "I'm not here to threaten you, Nate. I'm here to tell you the truth." Nate's brow furrowed, a sinking feeling settling in his gut. "The truth about what?" Zara moved closer, her steps deliberate, her gaze never leaving his. "About Anais, about the mission, about what's really happening here." Nate stiffened, but he didn't back away. He had spent too much time living in the dark, blindly trusting the fractured pieces of information Anais had given him. Now, with the storm raging and tensions high, he wasn't sure what to believe anymore. But he needed answers. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Tell me." Zara paused, studying him as though deciding how much to reveal. Then she spoke, her voice measured and cold. "Anais is no longer fit to lead. You know that. She's compromised, emotionally, mentally, physically. The pregnancy has made her weak, and now she's lost sight of our mission. And you," she took a step closer, her eyes narrowing, "you are the cause of all of it." Nate felt a flicker of anger rise in his chest, but he kept it in check. "Anais is stronger than you think," he said evenly. "She cares about her people, about what happens to you. And she's still in control, no matter what you say." Zara laughed, a short, bitter sound. "In control? Do you think this is about control, Nate? You think this is about whether or not she can keep her grip on a crumbling mission? Her eyes flashed with a darkness that Nate hadn't seen before. This is about survival. About what happens when the Xylarian fleet arrives. And believe me, they will arrive. Anais has deluded herself into thinking there's another way, that this emotion she feels for you can change anything. Zara took another step forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. But she's wrong. The fleet will come, and when they do, there will be no mercy. Not for her, not for you, not for any of us. Nate's breath caught in his throat. He had known, of course, that the invasion was only a matter of time, that Anais and her crew were merely the first wave, and that the rest of the Xylarian Empire was watching, waiting. But hearing it from Zara made it real, too real. His heart pounded in his chest as the implications sank in. You don't have to be a part of this, Zara said, her tone suddenly softening. She stepped even closer, so close that Nate could feel the cool energy radiating from her. Anais can't protect you, but I can. Nate's jaw clenched, his mind racing. There was something about Zara's offer that sent a chill down his spine, something darker than simple ambition. She wasn't just trying to seize power, she was trying to turn everything, everyone against Anais. I'm not betraying Anais, Nate said firmly, his voice thick with emotion. She's more than just a leader to me. I care about her. Zara's smile vanished, replaced by something cold and dangerous. Care? Is that what you think this is? You're just a pawn, Nate. You're nothing more than a tool we use to complete the mission. Anais is playing you, and you don't even realize it. Nate's stomach twisted, but he refused to back down. I don't believe you. You will. Zara's voice was low, a threat veiled in soft words. When the fleet arrives and everything burns, you'll realize you were nothing but a mistake. Before Nate could respond, Zara turned and left, the door closing behind her with a soft click, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the terrible weight of truth she had dropped on him. Nate stood in the silence, the storm outside pounding against the walls, his mind spinning with fear, anger, and confusion. Had he been wrong about Anais? Was this all just a game, a twisted manipulation, a larger plan he couldn't understand? And what would he do when the fleet arrived? His heart raced as he stared into the flames, Zara's words echoing in his head. The truth was out now, and it was darker than he had ever imagined. But even in the face of betrayal, one thing remained clear to Nate. He had to protect Anais, no matter the cost. The storm outside raged, but inside the beach house, the true tempest was brewing. Nate paced restlessly across the living room, his mind still reeling from Zara's words. The fleet was coming, and when it did, everything, Anais, the unborn children, Earth itself, would be wiped away in a brutal display of Xylarian power. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. This wasn't just a fight between Anais and Zara anymore. This was about survival. He had to find Anais. Just as he reached for the door to the hallway, it swung open with a violent crash. Zara stormed in, flanked by Lyra and Nixus, their faces set with grim determination. Zara's eyes were ablaze, not with rage, but with a chilling certainty, the kind that left no room for hesitation or doubt. It's over, Nate, Zara said, her voice sharp and commanding. You have no idea what you're involved in. Anais is finished, and if you try to stand by her now, you'll fall with her. Nate's pulse spiked. He stood his ground, though the weight of Zara's words pressed against him like a physical force. I'm not letting you do this, he said, his voice steady despite the fear rising inside him. Anais hasn't given up, and neither have I. Zara smirked, her lips curling into a cruel smile. You think you can save her? Save yourself? You're delusional. She took a step closer, her presence looming like a shadow. This is bigger than you, Nate. It's bigger than her. You're just a speck, a fleeting moment in the endless expanse of the Xylarian Empire. We've conquered worlds far more advanced than this one, and nothing, not love, not sentiment, will stop what's coming. Nate's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to back down. He couldn't. Maybe it's not about stopping what's coming, he said, squaring his shoulders. Maybe it's about fighting for something worth saving. Zara's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating look. You don't understand. There is no saving Anais. She's made her choice, and now she's too weak to lead. If you're smart, you'll get out of the way. Before Nate could respond, the door at the far end of the room burst open. Anais strode in, her expression a mask of fury and control. Her blue eyes, once conflicted and distant, were now sharp and focused. She was no longer just a woman caught between duty and desire. She was a commander ready for war. Zara, Anais said, her voice low and steady, step aside. Zara didn't flinch. She met Anais's gaze with equal intensity, the air between them crackling with unresolved tension. You're unfit to lead, Zara spat. You've compromised everything. The mission, the crew, the future of our people, because of him. She pointed at Nate, her voice dripping with disdain. You've let a human, an inferior species, cloud your judgment. Nate clenched his fists, his body tense. He could see the battle brewing between them, the lines of loyalty shifting beneath the surface. Lyra and Nixus stood behind Zara, their faces uncertain but aligned with their lieutenant. Vale, the only one who hadn't fully fallen under Zara's influence, watched silently from the edge of the room, her loyalty still tethered to Anais but fragile. Anais took a slow step forward, her gaze locked on Zara. The mission was never about conquest alone, she said, her voice steady. It was about survival. We were sent here to assess, to conquer, yes, but we were also meant to learn. And I've learned something none of you understand. Zara sneered. And what's that? That humanity is more than a weakness, Anais replied. It's a strength, the ability to feel, to care, to fight for something more than power. That's what makes us stronger. That's what makes us different from the mindless machines of the Empire. Zara's expression hardened. You've lost your mind. No, Anais said softly, her eyes flicking to Nate. I've found something worth fighting for. Nate's breath caught in his throat. The weight of her words, the depth of what she was saying, hit him like a tidal wave. Anais wasn't just fighting for Earth. She was fighting for them, for their unborn child, for the chance at a future neither of them had ever thought possible. Zara's patience snapped. With a vicious snarl, she lunged at Anais, her hand reaching for the sleek weapon at her side. In an instant, Anais reacted, deflecting the attack with a sharp twist of her wrist, her reflexes as fast and deadly as ever. The two women collided with a force that shook the room, their bodies a blur of movement and precision. Nate watched in horror and awe as the battle unfolded. It was like nothing he'd ever seen before. Two alien warriors, equally matched, fighting not just for control of their mission, but for the fate of everything they had come to represent. Zara fought with cold precision, each move calculated to end the fight quickly and decisively. Anais, on the other hand, fought with a fierce, unrelenting passion, her blows fueled by something deeper than mere survival. The sound of fists and bodies colliding echoed through the room, punctuated by sharp breaths and the occasional grunt of pain. Lyra and Nixus moved to intervene, but Val stepped forward, her hand raised in warning. Stay back, Vale said, her voice low but firm. This is their fight. Nate's heart raced as he watched the two women tear into each other, each strike more brutal than the last. Blood stained their pale skin, and their breaths came in ragged gasps, but neither of them backed down. They were both warriors, bred for battle. But this fight was about more than strength or skill. This was about belief. In the end, it was Anais who gained the upper hand. With a swift, calculated strike, she sent Zara crashing to the ground, disarming her in one fluid motion. The room fell silent, save for the sound of Zara's ragged breathing as she lay sprawled on the floor, defeated. Anais stood over her, breathing heavily, her face streaked with blood but resolute. It's over, Zara. Zara glared up at her, her chest heaving. This isn't over. She spat, her voice trembling with rage. The fleet is coming. You can't stop what's already in motion. Anais knelt beside her, her voice cold but not unkind. No, Zara, you're right. I can't stop them, but I can choose what happens next. With that, Anais rose to her full height, turning to face Nate. Their eyes met, and in that moment he knew. The battle for control had ended, but the war for their future had only just begun. The air was still. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the beach bathed in the pale light of dawn. The silence inside the house was almost eerie, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for the dust to settle. Nate stood by the large window, watching the waves roll onto the shore, but his mind was far from peaceful. Behind him, the aftermath of the battle lay heavy in the air. Zara, now subdued and bound, was slumped against the far wall, her dark eyes smoldering with anger and resentment. Lyra and Nixus stood nearby, silent and uncertain, their loyalty fractured. Vale, ever watchful, lingered at the edges of the room, her loyalty to Anais solid but fragile in the wake of what had just transpired. And Anais, strong, fierce, but deeply wounded, stood at the center of it all. Blood still streaked her skin from the fight with Zara, but it was the weight in her eyes that struck Nate the hardest. She had won the battle for control, but at what cost? The woman standing before him was not the same unshakable commander who had landed on Earth with a mission to conquer. She had changed, and that change was as terrifying as it was profound. Nate's heart ached as he watched her, the woman he had come to care for more than he ever thought possible. He knew the decision that lay before her was monumental, not just for them, but for the future of two worlds. She had held Zara at bay, defied the Empire, and fought for something far beyond conquest, but the real challenge was yet to come. Anais finally broke the silence, her voice low and raw. The fleet is coming. Nate's stomach clenched. He had known this was inevitable, but hearing the words aloud brought a wave of cold dread crashing over him. The Xylarian fleet, an unstoppable force engineered for war, would arrive soon, and when it did, Earth would face annihilation unless something drastic changed. He turned to Anais, his voice thick with emotion. "What are we going to do?" Anais didn't answer right away. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if she could find the answers there. For a long moment, the weight of everything they had been through hung between them. Her mission, their love, the unborn children growing inside her and the others. It was all so impossibly fragile, yet it was the only thing holding her together. "We can't run," she said finally, her voice firm but laced with uncertainty. "If the fleet finds us here, they will destroy everything, and if they find us anywhere else, they will hunt us down." Nate stepped closer, his heart pounding. "Then we fight." Anais shook her head, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You don't understand. This isn't a battle we can win. The Xylarian fleet is too powerful. They will come, and they will crush anything in their path." She paused, her eyes flickering with a deep sadness. "Even me." Nate's throat tightened. He could feel the enormity of the decision pressing down on her, suffocating her. The woman he had come to love was a warrior, but this wasn't a fight she could win with strength alone. This was about survival. Hers, his, their unborn children's. "What if," Nate began, the idea forming slowly in his mind. "What if we made them believe you were still loyal?" Anais frowned, her brow furrowing. "What are you saying?" Nate's mind raced as he tried to piece it together. If the fleet comes, they'll expect to find Earth on its knees, ready for conquest. But what if you gave them something else? A reason to leave? A reason? Anais' eyes narrowed, the strategist in her waking up. "What kind of reason?" "You tell them the planet isn't worth conquering," Nate said, the idea taking shape. "You tell them humanity is too primitive, not worth the effort. Convince them to leave." Anais' lips pressed into a thin line, doubt flickering in her eyes. "They won't take my word for it. Not after everything that's happened. Zara will make sure they know I've gone against the mission." Nate felt his pulse quicken. "Then we make it convincing. Show them the chaos. Show them the rebellion." He glanced at Zara, still seething against the wall. "She wants to take control? Let her. Let the fleet think you've lost command, that your mission is a failure." Zara's head snapped up, her eyes blazing with fury. "You're insane," she hissed. "You think you can deceive the Empire?" Anais stared at Nate, her expression unreadable. She was silent for so long that Nate wondered if he had pushed too far. But then, slowly, her gaze shifted from Zara to the others. "It could work," Val said softly, stepping forward. "If we stage the rebellion, make it seem as though we've lost control, the fleet may decide Earth isn't worth the trouble." Anais' gaze flickered with hope, but only for a moment. "And what happens after? What happens when the fleet leaves? We're still here, and they'll still know about us. They'll never stop watching." Nate swallowed hard, his heart racing. "Then we leave? Together." Anais blinked as if the thought had never crossed her mind. "Leave?" "Earth isn't the only option," Nate said, his voice soft but resolute. "You have a ship, and the galaxy is big enough for all of us. We go. We raise our children somewhere the Empire can't find us. We start over." Anais stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. She had spent her entire life serving the Empire, believing that there was no other way, no escape from the endless cycle of conquest and destruction. But now, standing in front of Nate, the man who had shown her another path, she saw it. A new destiny, one shaped not by power, but by love, by the life growing inside her. Her lips parted, her voice barely a whisper. "Can we really do that?" Nate reached out, gently taking her hand. "We can. We just have to believe it's possible." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Anais smiled. It was small, tentative, but it was real. And in that moment she knew. This was the future she had to fight for. Not the Empire, not the mission. This, Nate, their children, their freedom. Together they would leave the war behind and chart a new course, one that no Empire could ever control. With a deep breath, Anais turned to her crew, her eyes filled with the determination of a leader who had found something truly worth fighting for. "We stage the rebellion," she said firmly, "and then we leave this world behind." And so, as the first rays of dawn broke through the storm clouds, the path was set. Not for conquest, not for destruction, but for a new destiny, one born of love, hope, and the promise of a future beyond the stars.